This week's 1044 is brought to you by Chevron Delos 600 ADF Ultra Low Ash Diesel Engine Oil. It's time to kick some ash. Knowing your total cost of ownership is important, but so is taking a deep dive across all of your financials. And that's going to give you what we call a fleet spend analysis. Hey everybody, welcome to the 1044, a weekly webisode from the editors here at CCJ. I'm Jason Cannon and my co-host on the other side is Matt Cole. Almost nothing about running or managing a trucking company is easy, but on the surface, calculating a truck's total cost of ownership really isn't all that complex. You total up your cost of capital, vehicle maintenance, depreciation, licensing costs, and then factor for fuel, and you're kind of done. There's other nuances here depending on what your application is, but those are the core components.
A fleet spend analysis includes some of these same metrics, but its goal is different. A thorough analysis behind fleet expenditures exposes wasted resources, rogue spending across multiple locations for fleets that operate out of more than one terminal, chaotic payment processes, and opportunities to operate more efficiently.
Spend analysis begins with identifying all the fixed and variable costs associated with a fleet's asset and determining the cost of ownership. But Pat Gaskin, Senior Vice President of Fleet Solutions at Corcentric, says a fleet spend analysis can break through generic barriers or buckets that often just show a carrier a very high-level view of what's going on and arm fleets with the kind of information that's beneficial when negotiating with vendors.
When you do a fleet spend analysis, it's sort of taking every vendor that you have in fleets, all right? You break down over the past year, 2 years, who have I spent money with, right? And then by identifying all of the folks that I've, laid out cash to, I now categorize all of the vendors. Is it a tire supplier, parts, lubes, whatever it is? Where do they fit with regards to, I may have multiple tire vendors, okay? I may have multiple parts suppliers. All right, so I categorize them. By categorizing, I can see how much money is each fleet category, all right? Once I've identified that, I can now say, okay, well, now I've got some real meat to negotiate with my suppliers because I know exactly how much I've spent in that category over the past year, right? So you can sort of consolidate spend. You can generate an RFP to the current suppliers and say, here's the volume that I'm negotiating. All right. And, here's the product. You can get very detailed in your RFP. And then all of the suppliers will come back to you, what's, best service, best price, best product. Right. So it really helps you to consolidate your spend and then lower your overall cost.
Pat says fleets with multiple terminals should closely analyze their spend because so many of their vendor accounts are negotiated on a national basis, and it's almost a certainty that some of those services are being farmed out to more localized providers.
Now you can identify sort of what we call rogue spending, all right, in your fleet world. So if you have 50 different locations and you have a national account program for tires, and you have 45 locations that participate in the national account with the one supplier that you negotiated with, and then there's 5 that buy on their own, you can quickly identify those 5 locations and bring that rogue spending back up underneath the contracted program. So it really sort of drives compliance with, existing contracts, existing vendors. So it really helps from a corporate perspective to manage spend. The rogue spend is really, if every time we go into a fleet, that's one of the biggest drivers of inefficiency and excess cost is every, location has a relationship with a local vendor and they feel that they've negotiated the best program. But it's just as if, you have a 2-truck fleets, right? And you're negotiating your tire program based on 2 trucks. If you join like a group purchasing organization, the GPO negotiates a program on the power of 800,000 assets and $150 million to spend. Obviously, there's power in numbers. Same thing happens internally with fleets. If that local guy has got a local relationship with a local vendor, He thinks he's buying, parts best in class, but the corporation has a national agreement, and he's not utilizing or he doesn't even know about it, right? That's where we find that we can drive the most cost out. We did an example. We were working with a waste hauler up in the Northeast, and we did sort of a spend analysis for them. We broke it down. I mean, we really got down to the nitty gritty. We broke it down into one particular part category, part number in particular. They burned through a ton of brake drums. And in just this one part, by consolidating the spend and channeling it through one vendor versus what they were doing through multiple vendors, all of the locations buying on their own, we were able to save the organization over $300,000 per year in just brake drums.
The data that comes out of an analysis is only as good as the data that went into it. And Pat cautioned fleets against using a wide range of averages because that's just going to skew the outcome. He says when you're evaluating asset replacement and asset lifecycle, it's important to determine the asset's true operating cost for each year of operation versus the average operating cost over time. But before we hear more from Pat about that, let's hear from 1044 sponsor Chevron Lubricants. Protecting your diesel engine and its aftertreatment system has traditionally been a double-edged sword. The same engine oil that is so essential to protecting your engine's internal parts is also responsible for 90% of the ash that is clogging up your DPF and upping your fuel and maintenance costs. Outdated industry thinking still sees a trade-off between engine and emission system protection, and Chevron was tired of it. So they spent a decade of R&D developing a no-compromise formulation. Chevron Lubricants developed a new ultra-low ash diesel engine oil that is specifically designed to combat DPF ash clogging. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology cuts sulfate ash by a whopping 60%, which reduces the rate of DPF clogging and extends DPF service life by 2.5 times. And just think what you can do with all the MPGs you're going to add from cutting your number of regens. But Delo 600 ADF isn't just about aftertreatment. It provides complete protection, extending drain intervals by preventing oil breakdown. Before you had to choose between protecting your engine or your aftertreatment system, and now you don't. 600 ADF from Delo with OmniMax technology, it's time to kick some ash.
You just take sort of your total cost of ownership and break it down into cost per mile. Right. And I say, okay, I've got a 4-year-old asset and I've spent, X number of dollars over those 4 years. Okay. And it has X number of miles on the odometer today. And I just divide the total spend by the total miles. And I said, my average cost per mile is pretty damn low. Right. So I should continue operating that asset based upon its perceived low cost per mile. Right. So what we do is when we start doing our analysis, we look at year one operating costs. Okay. How much did I spend on that unit in the first year of operation? How many miles did I run? And then now that I'm in year 4, how much did I spend year 4 and how many miles did I run in year 4? Now that picture is much different because you'll see the escalation in your cost per mile over time. All right. And that's what you use to determine when to replace the asset. It could be eating your lunch in year 4. All right. And you not even know because you've averaged all of the costs over the 4-year cycle.
In reining in vendors, Pat says it's not only helpful in driving down the price, but it also makes it easier to manage the spend because you're reducing the number of people you have to pay for similar services. But the key is making sure you include all the core operating costs.
You just run down the top operating costs of any fleet, fuel being number one. If you're not managing your fuel spend and how you buy fuel, you might as well get into a different type of business, right? Next category is tires, fuel, tires, and then you go into the actual equipment itself and then parts and supplies and whatnot. So you really, as you break down your overall fleet spend, you've got to take, your top spend, right, categories, and then just sort of slowly drill down into, the more insignificant areas. There's a cutoff point. At some point, you just say, I really don't spend much money at all in these categories. And we sort of refer to that as tail spend. And tail spend is something that needs to be managed. But at the end of the day, a lot of times it's easier to sort of outsource that from a sourcing perspective to somebody that can more effectively manage all the little pieces. But the top categories, if you're managing your fuel, your tires, your parts, your lubes, the equipment cost itself, the procurement of the asset, the financing asset, those are all really critical components of the puzzle.
When you compile a spend analysis, or at least a good one, you're going to be staring at a pile of numbers. But what are they really trying to tell you?
When you look at, a spend analysis, you got to sort of soup to nuts, right? I start with the asset itself, and then I carry it all the way through the disposal of the asset, right? So by buying the right asset for the right job, a lot of times when, procurement is divorced from fleets, if you will, they'll say lowest cost asset might not be the best asset for the job, right? If Treasury and Finance are off negotiating their piece of the puzzle, divorced from fleet, may not set up the optimum financing program for the fleet that fits the life cycle of the assets. All right. And then you get into all of the stuff that we've been talking about with regards to the variable sort of costs associated with the fleet, fuel, all of the parts and supplies and tires and stuff like that. And then ultimately, when you're looking at it from a holistic soup to nuts perspective, what do I do with the asset when I'm done with it? And how do I determine I'm done with it? There's so many variable expenses out there. Our total cost of operation, you can't just sort of say 5 years and out, 500,000 miles and out type of thing, because the variable expenses affect the overall asset life cycle. Fuel right now is a huge component. $4.50 a gallon for diesel fuel. It has a much greater impact on my asset life cycle than it did at $2.50 per gallon. All right. So at $4.50 a gallon, if the next model of tractor that comes to market gets 2, 3, 5/10 of a mile per gallon better in fuel economy, it makes a lot more sense to replace earlier than later based on the high cost of fuel. $2.50 a gallon, I may extend my life cycles. $4.50 a gallon, shorten my life cycles. So you can see how just that one category, fuel, has an impact on the asset. Interest rates rising, all right? Equipment's more expensive. It's going to lengthen my life cycle. Low interest rates, low cost of equipment, shorten my life cycle. So all of these, market dynamics play into sort of that asset replacement cycle, spend analysis. It's absolutely critical that you follow every cost associated with the fleet.
Pat mentioned a truck's life cycle, and many fleets let warranty determine when it's time to trade a truck. But he says a spend analysis can uncover if a trucking company is getting their bang for their buck with their warranty.
Are you tracking your warranty recovery? I mean, if you're spending $5,000 per asset on warranty and you only get $1,500 back, I mean, that's a complete waste of money, right? And you wouldn't believe how many fleets don't track warranty recovery. All right. They just if it's covered under warranty and it didn't cost me anything, I don't care about it. Okay. But you should, because it's very expensive. So, when you're doing your spend analytics, that's another piece of the puzzle that you have to really sort of look at. Am I getting my $5,000 per truck back? And we've got a saying that the house never loses here, so.
That's it for this week's 1044. You can read more on ccjdigital.com, and you can find Corcentric's free ebook, A Comprehensive Guide to Managing Fleet Spend, linked in the post below. And as always, you can find the 1044 each week on CCJ's YouTube channel. And if you've got questions, comments, criticisms, or feedback, please hit us up at 1044trucking@gmail.com or give us a call at 404-491-1380. Until next week, everybody stay safe.